Good evening. There is no indictment of Hillary, but Comey didn't say she wasn't guilty. I'm Dan Perkins.
What are the polls saying? Nothing. If you read enough of them, you realize that they don't know what's going on. I'm Don Mazzella.
It's time for Two Guys from Verona. Each week, you will hear from Dan Perkins, a financial expert, a regular columnist for the Hill website, and best-selling author, and Don Mazzella, a veteran journalist, author, and radio host talking about things that concern you politically, financially, and socially. They will also try to give listeners a heads up on future happenings.
Well, Don, there's more and more detail coming out about the Comey decision not to indict Hillary. And as I've talked several times today, but let me give you the latest. According to a release, the director of the FBI, who is a law enforcement agency, decided to rewrite a federal law in order to have room for him to come with the decision he did for Mrs. Clinton. See, there are many people who felt she should have been charged under a certain provision of the law about the responsibility of public officials maintaining the logs and emails and all documents under the federal records law. That law, as currently written, does not have the word intent in the law. Just because you don't have an intent to break the law doesn't mean that you can't be convicted for breaking the law. Mr. Comey, in his ruling today, said that he didn't believe there was an intent on the part of Mrs. Clinton, operative word, intent, to disobey the law. So therefore, he didn't think there was a prosecutor who he could find who would enter into a prosecutorial challenge against Mrs. Clinton. So the law that he's citing doesn't have the word intent. And Mr. Comey decided that he wanted to impose the word intent in order to find a way to let her off. Now, he did say also that she operated in a manner to jeopardize the national security of the United States by her and her staff's treatment of confidential and top-secret emails. And he felt that she was reckless. Reckless was the word he used, in quotes, in her behavior about how they treated this confidential information. Now, we know that Mrs. Clinton has told us forever that she did not willingly know or transmit or resend any information in any email that the email was marked confidential. Mr. Comey said today that that wasn't true. In fact, she had sequences in 53 emails dealing with classified information all the way above top secret. So everybody's kind of trying to figure out what happened to the straight arrow, Mr. Comey, that everybody had told us he was. What, did he buckle under pressure from the White House? Would the president have scheduled a trip today with Hillary Clinton if he didn't know what the outcome of what Mr. Comey was going to say today? There's a lot of questions being asked. What influence, if any, did the decision for Bill Clinton to meet with Loretta Lynch last week on the tarmac at Phoenix Airport have to do with the decision of the subordinate to Loretta Lynch, the director of the FBI? One of the things that is interesting that may in fact be, and you and I haven't talked about this, Don, but one of the things that may be in fact a major unforeseen consequences of this decision is the unification of the Republican Party behind Mr. Trump in order to rid this country of the Clintons. You know, it's interesting. I look, there are pages literally pages of commentary on Drudge today about this from all over. Rand Paul, who was a harsh critic of Donald Trump, came out today and was just blistering the government. And he was saying that this is an example. This is a perfect example of what the American people are saying that they're sick and tired of. This, not too big to fail, but too big to go to jail. That's what Hillary is. She's not too big to fail. She's just too big to go to jail. And what we have is a situation where even the Bernie Sanders people are absolutely outraged and said that the decision was rigged. So we've got an awful lot of people. In fact, she was on the campaign trail today with the president, and from what I've heard so far, she didn't mention it at all. She didn't mention it at all. Now, I think that as more and more people outside of the Beltway and outside of New York and Los Angeles hear what happened and they begin to understand, I got to believe that they're going to think that she's a bigger crook than they thought she was, and that Mr. Trump has been telling the truth about her from the very beginning. I even heard just a snippet this evening as I was driving into the hotel from Mark Levin, who has been not a supporter of Trump at all, but was clearly outraged at the manipulation and how the director of the FBI could rewrite legislation that the Congress passed to find a way to let her off the hook. So there's a lot of people, including myself, that are very disappointed at what we thought was a straight arrow, who decided that he was going to rewrite the law in order to give her a chance to get off. Don?
Well, as usual, you throw a lot at me, but the American people have a recourse to right this wrong if they really feel it as vividly as you do, and that is if they go to the polls in November and repudiate her. Let's look at it from the Donald Trump view. He's been calling her a crook. He's been doing a good job at it, and she played into it. You can look at it one of two ways. She played into his hands by this sort of thing, or she's finally put it this cloud away. That's how the New York Times is playing it, as it said in its story. The clouds lingering over her campaign are now dissipated, and we can go to the campaign. I don't think it will, no matter what the Times wants to say. It's interesting. The Times brought up the General Petrakis issue. He got a misdemeanor, and she got for sharing it with his lover, and she gets off scot-free for sharing it with the world. Top secret data. Plus the fact, if she had come back in May or whenever it was last year and said at the time, rather than this lame excuse that she didn't want to have two iPhones at the same time, or some other thing, we might have been over it. But it sometimes is not the crime that kills you; it's what happens afterwards. And I think if Donald Trump plays this right, it could help him substantially in the campaign. But again, as you and I both believe, this campaign will really be won on the economic issue. That's the one that counts more than anything else. Yeah. I'm back to you, Dave.
Yeah, I know. We just got about 30 seconds here before we got to go to a break. But the point is, and I know the segments run a little long, but I get a little heated sometimes, and I apologize to our audience. But the point here is that we listened to what the director of the FBI, who told us that he rewrote. He didn't tell us until we discovered it that he rewrote the law usurped Congress's responsibility of passing the law on the protection of government documents, and yet he also said that she was reckless. Now, if I'm Trump, I'm going to say, wait a minute. The director of the FBI says this person running for president is reckless, can't be trusted with national security. I mean, that's what I would do. We got to take a break. This is Dan Perkins.
And Don Mazzella.
Two guys from Verona, and we'll be right back after this message.
You're listening to Two Guys from Verona with Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella. They'll be right back after a word from their sponsors.
Hi, this is Dan Perkins, co-host of Two Guys from Verona, and I want to tell you about the new book written by my partner, Don Mazzella. It is said America is two nations, one of rich and one of poor, one of white and another of black, one of adventurers and another one of travelers. Don Mazzella's new book, An American Family Sampler, looks at this nation's first 2 centuries through the eyes of 2 families, one white and one black. The award-winning newsman has fashioned a fast-paced narrative designed to educate and entertain you, based on real people, including the descendants of slave freed by George Washington. The pages are replete with historical characters, accurate events, great victories, and even great defeats. An American Family Sampler, spelled out with details and events affecting not only the families, but also the family. An American Family Sampler is available through Amazon.com, BarnesandNobles.com, and wherever good books are sold. This is Dan.
Welcome back. You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Once again, here's your hosts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella.
There's a musical called The Sound of Music, and one of the songs, The Hills Are Alive, with the sound of music. I think the hills are alive all over the country with all kinds of polling data. So talk to us about the polls.
For one thing, that it's too soon. Something like this needs 3 days to really feel how the country is going.
You're talking about the Comey decision today? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
It's clearly evident. It'll have an effect, but what an effect? Really, you have to look at, if you want to look at this thing, in 3 days we'll know what the nation's initial reaction to this is, and in 7 days or 9 days, you'll get what will be the long-lasting effect. I have no doubt that it will affect the Hillary Clinton's numbers. I don't think it's going to give them a boost. I think they will hurt. But I want to talk about the fact that the polls really are not doing their job. If you take the various national polls, Rasmussen, Gallup, all of them, some have Hillary up by 8 points, some have Trump up by 4, others have them tied. And if you go state by state, the only ones that are really you can look at, if you get a look at them, are the ones being conducted by the Republican and National committees. Those are the ones that really try to find out, best guess who's going to the polls, best guess to have representative samples. As you pointed out, Dan, and by the way, that was a great catch last week about CNN. 70% of their participants were Democrats, and also you've got to overlay that with focus groups. You put all of this together, as someone did tonight and sent me a quick email, and Donald Trump is up by 1 percentage point throughout the country. Now you can break it down into the Electoral College and where he's ahead or behind. But the interesting thing is, and the important thing to keep in mind is, he's within striking distance or leading in every state. That's bad news for Hillary Clinton. After spending all this time and all this money putting together these organizations in all the states and devoting time. In fact, there was an interesting story in the New York Post, and they have a section on comings and goings of the celebrities, and the Hillary Clinton people out in the Hamptons were complaining that they had to go back to the city to work on July 4th, and they were very upset about it. If you were ahead or if she was comfortable, they wouldn't be forcing them to work on July 4th. But all of this tells me, and it tells anybody that knows anything about polls, is that this year's polling is going to be the most demanding and probably the one widest from the mark than any in the last 20 years. And so, but as my wife said, sometimes there's a stampede effect, and if one poll really hits home and gets people thinking to go with a winner, that may hurt Trump, or it may help Trump. But whatever happens, the media is not going to be on his side. Back to you, Dan.
Yeah, I understand that the media is not going to be on his side, but there was an interesting number that I saw today on Drudge, and it was the results of the primary process. The number of people who voted as Republicans in the Republican primaries across the nation was up 62% from 2012. The Democratic voters was down 21% from 2012 through the whole primary season. So 3 times the swing in the Republican percentages than there was in the Democratic percentage. And the percentages actually went down. So almost 4 times the differential. But I guess my question is, at what point, Don, does the polling data become worthless?
Right now it's worthless.
Why is it worthless? Now, I'm not speaking specifically about the Hillary issue and Comey today. I'm talking about the polling data that's taking place prior to today.
Well,
why is it not worth anything?
Because the pollsters simply have not put together a representative sample of what is America. What I mean by that is this nation has changed, and the polling companies who are located in the metropolitan areas simply have not put together the panels that truly reflect who's going to vote in November, and who represent how the American people feel. And unless we're wrong, you and I, what the people in Washington perceive and what's happening out there in the hinterlands are 2 different Americas. And the proof of the pudding is Donald Trump. No one in his right mind thought that Trump would be where he is today. Mm-hmm. Including, I suspect, by the way, Donald Trump. But he's there because the American people really want to change. Hillary Clinton, no matter what happens in this race, is the last of the old-time politicians that ruled America from 1964 onward. Whether if Trump wins or he doesn't win, the next general election will be much different. Hillary Clinton, if she's president, will be fighting for her life because her policies, continuing Obama, will simply not work in the world we know, the economic world we know, the international world we know, or the social world we know. Don't forget, we're also having changes in our social makeup, and people are simply not happy with where we're going as a nation, socially and morally. And we certainly have seen the end of the great black integration. Governor Christie in New Jersey has actually proposed a radical idea that no matter where you are, spending for education dollars will be even, whether you're in a city or in a suburb. The same amount of money will be spent per pupil. What a radical idea. It hasn't been thought of since 1960, which was the last year. Okay, I mean, changes are coming. The fact that Christie would even propose it, admittedly, is a lame con. But the point is, even though the Democrats here in New Jersey have said no, 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 people are beginning to say, wait a second, what a radical idea. What a good idea.
Right. Yeah, we got to take a break. This is Dan Perkins.
And Don Mazzella.
Two Guys from Verona. Go to our website, twoguysfromverona.com. And remember, if it's important to you, it's important to us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Two Guys from Verona with Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella. They'll be right back after these messages.
I just said earlier about it takes about a week for events to sink in. And it's been just about a little over a week and a half with the British vote. Consequences are sitting in. I'll turn it over to you now, Dan. You have some good ideas.
Okay, thank you. First of all, if you look at the chart of the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones Industrials, before the vote, what happened after it and how far it went down, and where it closed the end of the quarter last Thursday, about a week later, what you found out was one event, because the American capital markets and many of the other markets around the world, which George Soros predicted were going to go to an Armageddon level below what we had in the 2008 and 2009 mortgage crisis in the United States, didn't seem to happen. On Friday, the finance minister for England said that they would be accommodative, making sure that there was sufficient money supply in the pipeline to meet the liquidity needs of the government and for the industry and business in the country. Now, we had a little bit, we really went a long way in a relatively short period of time, and today the market sold off modestly, about 100 points in the U.S., and similar amounts across the rest of the world. And so there was a little reaction today. What seems to be disappearing, at least from the headlines, and I can't tell whether it's disappearing in total, but the idea that the elites in England and Wales and Scotland and Ireland were trying to overturn this vote. They wanted the 1,450 members of Parliament to override the people, and that was their initial reaction after the vote. But that rhetoric, at least as I said publicly, seems to have calmed down and disappeared, because the elites realize that if you go after the ministers in Parliament and indicate that they're going to pressure them to overturn the vote of the people, there's no great assurance that the people in Parliament will agree to the elites, especially since the House of Commons is so politically sensitive that the people have voted, and by a reasonable majority, about what they want, and a plurality, 72% of the people voting. So now they're beginning to think about, well, what are we going to do here? And then they're talking about, well, maybe there's a special class within the euro that they could have, or European Union that they could have, and nobody seems to be buying that story either. So I think it's beginning to sink in that, in fact, that the British government is going to leave the European Union, and that exodus may cause other countries, talked about, for example, France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, about leaving the European Union, which then creates a situation where Germany is the remaining major power in the European Union. Now, part of that problem is that last Tuesday, just about a week ago today, after this vote, there was a release, I don't think intentionally, but unintentionally, we had a situation where there was a memo, a working memo, as I understand it, between the French and the German government for a proposal to go to the European Union to suggest that the Union require all of its members to turn over all of its military to a central army and to turn over their economies to the central government in Brussels. I think that took a lot of steam out of the elites in their desire to want to try and keep England in the EU when it got out that what they were thinking about. And what's interesting about it, Don, is that there are these thoughts that are coming out now about where the EU is going to go are the very issues that caused the middle class to throw the bums out and say we're not going to give up our country, and we're not going to have 60% of our laws and more being dictated by somebody that we don't even know who they are, which is the bureaucrats in Brussels. I think that it, as I said to you last week, when I was up in the wee hours of the evening listening to the BBC, or watching it on television, but listening to it because I shut my eyes not to go to sleep, because I realized that the rhetoric that was being talked about and the language that was being talked about and the issues that were being talked about in England are the very same issues that are being talked about in the United States. And given what's happening in the world economy and what has been not happening in the world economy for a number of years, we have the same situation in many other parts of the world, that there is a revolution growing to throw out the elites and the elected politicians who have not been able to successfully provide for the people, and they need to go. And so this is not just England and the United States. The same kind of rumblings are going on in Spain, and they're going on in Japan. There's some rumblings now going on in China because their growth rates have dropped so dramatically. And so this whole unrest is coming at a time when the elites can least deal with it because they see their world crumbling around them, and they're doing everything they can on a desperate basis to try and preserve the empire that they had, and they don't want to look at it straight in the eye and see that it's crumbling around them, and that the people, the free people, are expressing their opinions and their dissatisfaction at the polls, which is what you talked about in the last segment. America needs to go to the polls and tell them that they want to reject Hillary Clinton and that whole genre. Any comments from you, sir?
Oh, I have a lot of them, but the main one is the one about the armed forces. It would be really interesting trying to see the French and the German officers trying to meld their two armies. The only place it works is in the French Foreign Legion, where during post World War II, there are an awful lot of German officers and men in the Legion working under French officers. It's very interesting. There, the U.S. Military Academy and the War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, often tried to solve the scenario of a combined European force, and came to the conclusion it could not be done given the the nationalities involved. You know what a heaven is, don't you? It's made up of French cooks, Italian lovers, German officers, English policemen, and I forget what the last one is. Imagine putting all of that together into one army. And it never happened. That's number one. Number two, I think cooler heads are prevailing when, as analysis of the polling data has come in, and it has shocked the English elite. There's a story coming out about when they really put the polling data to work. They realized the four things. Number one, older people voted surprisingly against leaving the Union. The working class above 30 wanted to leave the Union. Young people did not come out in the numbers everybody expected, and when they did, voted almost 50-50. And that the blacks and immigrants voted overwhelmingly to stay in the Union. Very interesting. That sort of data. Now I'll turn it back to you.
Well, your timing is perfect. We need to get another break in here, and we'll be right back. This is Dan Perkins.
And Don Mazzella.
And we'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
You're listening to Two Guys from Verona with Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella. They'll be right back after a word from their sponsors. In this final segment, Don and Dan offer their predictions on what's going to happen in our world.
Well, Don, we were talking in the last segment about what was happening as it related to the what happened in Britain in the vote and the exit from the European Union. Last Friday, the finance minister for England said that they would provide liquidity, which I talked about in the last segment. Bond market, the American bond market, saw a significant decline in interest rates last Friday to the tune it got very close to the recorded low of yield on the 10-year Treasury. After the long weekend, and people thought about what was going on, the demand for the dollar continues to rise, making it one of the strongest currencies in the world. We now had a new all-time low set on the 10-year Treasury, about 1.33%. Now, there's some discussion that if in the last year of a president's term, in his second term, he tries to use the force of the government to propel the economy to the highest level he or she possibly can to create a stimulus either for his reelection as it's a first term or for his successor's reelection in a second term. Here we have now a situation where the first quarter GDP is probably going to come out on an annualized basis of something less than 1%. And the number of people unemployed is 97 or 94.7 million unemployed and underemployed. The participation rate is something in the neighborhood of less than 63%, 62.6, something like that. And so we have an economy that's not functioning, and people are saving money at a rate not seen in decades in this country, even though they're not earning anything on it. And so the Fed is looking at the pressure on interest rates because of the accelerating dollar, driving interest rates even lower. In fact, rates are lower than where the Fed wanted to go already in trying to raise interest rates. They've burned that 25 basis points that they put on. It's gone. And so what's happening is we have a continuation of the decline of interest rates on a global basis. Now, I said in our earlier show that this morning the Swiss government has a 50-year bond issue, meaning in the United States the longest we go is 30 years, but the Swiss went out 50 years to borrow money. The yield on a 50-year Swiss franc-denominated bond is now turned negative. Now think about that. You can go into the Swiss bond market and you can buy a 50-year term bond that you're guaranteed to lose money on in the next 50 years, every year for 50 years. But people are trying to buy them because they want to be in the Swiss franc because it's not part of the euro, and maybe it'll be a stronger currency, and maybe there's an opportunity to make money on the currency play versus not being able to make money on the coupon. You talked earlier about how things are upside down. Well, things are upside down in the credit markets and in the stock markets. And we still don't know all the implications, except that I think that there's been more damage done to the EU with Britain's exit than Britain. And on to you, sir.
Well, it's exactly a year since we entered into that infamous deal with our good friends, the Iranians. And I read a piece about how they've already violated the laws, and how Secretary of State Kerry does flip-flops to justify it, continue to justify it. There's seldom been a deal made by two countries comparative to this. Someone has said that they can only hark back to Munich before World War II. I wish that person was wrong, but he happens to be a very knowledgeable foreign service individual, and he feels that out of sight, out of mind. But in the meantime, the Iranians are really violating the I don't know what to call it. It's not a treaty.
Memorandum of Understanding. It's not a treaty. It's a memorandum of understanding.
And the worst part about it, President Obama was very clever. How do you cement it? You sell them 300 planes by Boeing. For the Iranian. But I want to point out that it's off the front page, but perhaps the thing that we really should be worrying about, it's what's happening in Iran. And we haven't brought up the word ISIS this entire broadcast, thank God. I'm a little tired, but what happened over the weekend clearly shows that ISIS is alive and well and killing Americans. And if
killing people all over the world.
Well, as someone said, I don't care about them so much as I care about the Americans that have died in Bangladesh and all over the place. And it's sad, but true. Things are happening out there that are off the headlines. And you remember a couple of years ago when we first started, Dan, I said that the atrocities would have to mount and grow bigger and bigger in order to remain on the front page. Well, and you've written a book about it. But at some point, It's going to reach the point where the nuclear explosion will be the only thing that'll make the front page. And I'm really worried about it, that it's escalating in that direction. We have the Iranians... go ahead.
Yeah. I just going to say in my first book, I talk about that whole progression theory that you're talking about, is that the way they intimidate the world is they start off and they started off with the beheading of one American reporter, and it got tremendous headlines in it. And then when the next one was killed, they got less, and the next single one got killed. So then they began to do more than one, and then they began to burning people in cages and drowning them, and there are 20 or 30 executed on a beach. And now they've gone to the bombings, and they're even attacking the holy city of Mecca, the mosque around the great shrines. And so I said in the book that it is a part of the progressive process for them. In order for them to keep their followers engaged, they have to escalate the types of attacks that they're going to have. And that's why when I heard Geraldo in Orlando talking about the attack at the dance club, when he said, when will America wake up and understand that these attacks are no longer, they're only going to be rifles and bombs for some period of time, and the next one is going to be chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons attack, and not hundreds, thousands, if not millions of Americans are going to die. Anyway, lots to talk about, and if you want to send us a note, go to the website, twoguysfromverona.com. You can send us an email, and I'm Dan Perkins.
Don Mazzella.
We'll talk to you next week.
You've been listening to Two Guys from Verona with Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella.